But for me, well, my story, and I had a quick scan around the crowd, and I realised quite quickly there's an awful lot of you around that have absolutely no idea what went on 30 years ago because you're too young. I realise that everybody that's been up and spoken already, well, they're all well old enough, they already know what happened back then. But just to fill you in on the day that really changed my life, without wanting to be too corny in a flash, the Atlantic Conveyor got bombed, which was a ship carrying our helicopters and carrying a load of the logistics for the whole campaign. Sadly, we put too much in one ship, which then left us very short. But ultimately, the Welsh Guards, along with the Scots Guards and the Gurkhas, we had to find different methods of transport to get across, because although we accept that the Marines and Paras are superhuman, they are only human, and they made the march across the islands. People call it the Great Yomp. Well, the Paras would call it a tab. There's a conflict of always interest between Army and Navy. But anyway, they made the journey, and they had to rest up for a few days because the journey was incredibly arduous and difficult. So they decided, having marched the Welsh Guards to the top of the mountain, marched us back down, having passed the most important bit of kit in these fantastic all-terrain vehicles called BVs. The most important bit of kit that you ever take to war? Journalists. They were in lovely, warm, fantastic all-terrain vehicles. Well, we got marched back down the hill. We eventually got put on board a ship called the Fearless. Fearless took us to a place called Lively Island. It was 8 miles from our destination. Took half the ship's complement that we had on board, took them off. Took them 8 hours to travel 8 miles in terrible weather conditions on these little landing crafts you've probably seen in films. People were starting to go down with hypothermia. That then led to a decision being made that they weren't going to risk the Fearless being in daylight because of the length of time the journey was taking, and it would have made it vulnerable to attack. So what happened then? They took us back around, the remainder, and they put us on this incredible fighting machine called the Sir Galahad. Sadly, she left very late at the demand of the bosses and the people in charge of the amphibious assault. Sometimes you may have an agenda, as we've heard about the politicians, Mr. Osborne having an agenda. Sometimes you've got to remain flexible. Sometimes you've got to change the way you do things. Just because you're driven by an objective doesn't mean you're going to get there by being bullheaded, by saying, I know better. Sometimes command and leadership of arrogance will let you down. And that's what happened to us, because the Sir Galahad had been bombed 2 days before. She'd been hit with a 500-pound bomb which didn't detonate. We were there. We had no landing craft to get off. And the last words I heard before I got blown up was, it's air raid warning green, it's red, get down, get down. And I actually looked up and saw the 500-pound bomb cut across my path, right through where my best friend was sleeping, it was last I saw of him, right through where my kit was lying and my friends were playing cards, and it went into an engine room and it detonated all the fuel. My journey back to the land of the living has been one that has been fairly well catalogued and fairly well documented. But what it's led me into a life which I could never have possibly believed would have happened. And in the early days, yes, despair, despondency, and in all honesty, there wasn't a great deal of vision of hope. But the one thing I did have in my life was the support of an awful lot of people. I had the support of my family, which was wonderful, because believe it or not all the guys who came back had that. I had the support of my country, my village, my regiment, the Welsh Guards. They were phenomenal, still are, to be honest with you, 31 years later on. But I also had the greater country. I had the great British country, purely and simply because I was on TV. The media followed me. But all that did, it opened up an opportunity for me. Because what you've got to understand is I'm no better and no worse than any of the other guys who went or came back. And not from any other conflict, to be honest with you. But what I was the worst injured come back from the Falklands campaign. And then that just led me to being somebody that was easily identified, to be focused on by the media, to be the first fly-on-the-wall documentary of a guy recovering from injury in conflict. But that gave me a platform to work off, a platform to help others, because I got given so much by so many people in this country who owe me absolutely nothing. No one's ever owed me a single thing, and nobody ever will or ever can. But likewise, it's the same for everybody. As we've heard, it's a tough old place, but nobody owes anybody anything. The only person who owes you anything is yourself. And the only person who owes me anything is me. And the only person who can do anything about my life is me. You know, but the one thing you've got to have in life is self-belief. You've got to like who you are. You've got to have self-belief that you can achieve if you really want to. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I've only got 10 minutes and, well, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.